It's April 2011. You grab your controller, hit the power button on your PlayStation 3. The screen won't load. You try again. Nothing. You check Twitter, and the internet is on fire. Sony hasn't just gone down for maintenance. Sony has gone dark. More than 100 million accounts exposed. Names, addresses, payment details. The largest data breach in gaming history. It happened with almost no warning. Sony wouldn't bring the network back online for nearly a month. This didn't start with a government or a crime syndicate. It started with one teenager in a bedroom in New Jersey, a soldering iron, and a question. I paid for this. Why doesn't it belong to me? That teenager was George Hotz, and this is how a fight over a video game console spiraled into something he never wanted. George Hotz grew up in Glen Rock, New Jersey. In 2007, at 17, he built a 3D holographic display inspired by Star Trek, good enough to win him $15,000 at the International Science and Engineering Fair. The kid was brilliant. But brilliance wasn't what made him dangerous. It was what he did next. That same year, Apple released the original iPhone with a catch nobody talks about anymore. Exclusive deal with AT&T. Buy the phone, you were locked to their network. Slide in a SIM from anywhere else, and the thing you paid hundreds of dollars for turned into a brick. Think about that. You own the hardware, you paid for it, but a company 3,000 miles away decides what you can do with it. To most buyers, that was the deal. To George, it didn't sit right. He was the kind of person who wouldn't let it go. So he spent that summer pulling the thing apart. A soldering iron, a logic board, hundreds of hours of trial and error. No tutorial. There wasn't one. He was hunting for a gap in the system, the kind of flaw an engineer overlooks because they assume no one would look that closely. And he found it. On August 21, 2007, he posted a YouTube video showing the first carrier-unlocked iPhone in the world, using nothing but a soldering iron and his own code. The video raced toward 2 million views. He later traded one unlocked phone for a Nissan 350Z and 3 more iPhones. One kid, one soldering iron, a multi-billion-dollar company outplayed from a bedroom. Apple wasn't thrilled, but there wasn't much of a legal case to make. He hadn't stolen anything. He'd just been smarter than the people who built it. For George, the iPhone was never really the point. The point was cracking something experts called impossible. 3 years later, he'd go looking for something much bigger. By 2010, the PlayStation 3 had earned legend status. Nobody had managed to hack it. The Everest of hacking targets. Sony had built it as a closed fortress. No custom firmware, no unauthorized software. Break in, and Sony could permanently lock you out. But Sony made one mistake, and it was the kind that changes everything. Early PS3 models shipped with Other OS, letting owners install Linux. Use your hardware however you want. Then, Sony removed the feature entirely, even on consoles people had already bought and paid for. Think about what that teaches you. You buy something, you're told it does something, then one day it doesn't do that anymore, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't return it. You can't fix it. You just have to accept that the thing you paid for got worse, and the company that sold it to you decided that was okay. A class action lawsuit followed. Customers were furious. Forum posts turned into petitions. Petitions turned into outrage. Online communities that had once celebrated the PS3 as the most powerful console on the market now turned on Sony with a fury the company hadn't seen before. People felt betrayed, not because they lost a feature, because they lost trust. And in that anger, someone found a crack. A hacking collective called Fail Zero Overflow discovered a mathematical flaw in how the PS3 generated its security signatures. The system was reusing a number that was supposed to be random every single time, close to an open door in cryptography. They presented it at a conference, almost casually, like it was nothing. A technical demonstration, a puzzle solved. But George Hotz was watching, and he saw what they'd started. He took that research and pushed it further than anyone expected. In January 2011, he announced what Sony had insisted was impossible. He'd extracted the PS3's master key, the cryptographic signature the console used to verify legitimate software, and released it publicly. Anyone could sign their own code, and the console would treat it as if it came from Sony. He posted the key to his blog for anyone to see. No paywall, no exclusivity, no condition. Just the key, out in the open, for the world to use. Think about what that means. Sony spent years and billions of dollars building a security system. A 21-year-old in New Jersey broke it in his spare time and then gave the answer away for free. A console Sony had spent years calling unbreakable had just been broken by a kid working with strangers on the internet. Sony's response wasn't a security patch. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement that they'd made a mistake with other OS. It was a lawsuit. They sued Hotz under the DMCA and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and then subpoenaed the IP addresses of everyone who had simply visited his website to watch the hack unfold. Every person who read his blog post was now a target. Think about that. You read something online, and suddenly a multi-billion-dollar corporation wants to know who you are, where you live, and what you were doing on their website. To a lot of people, that didn't look like protecting a product. It looked like punishing curiosity. It looked like a company that had taken something from its customers and was now going after anyone who pointed it out. And it made things much, much worse. That's when Anonymous stepped in. The Hacktivist Collective had been watching the Sony lawsuit unfold, and they saw it as corporate overreach. On April 4th, 2011, they posted a public statement declaring war on Sony. Hours later, denial of service attacks knocked Sony's websites offline for days. Not just the PlayStation site, all of it. The internet had picked a side. By spring, the case between Sony and Hotz settled quietly. Hotz agreed never to reverse engineer a Sony product again without admitting wrongdoing. It was supposed to be the end of the story, but that wasn't the real damage. The real damage was still coming. In the final weeks of April, the PlayStation Network wasn't just knocked offline, it was infiltrated. Whoever got in walked away with personal data tied to 77 million accounts. Names, addresses, passwords, credit card numbers, payment information, everything. Days later, Sony Online Entertainment was also breached. Another 24.6 million accounts compromised. The total? More than 100 million users affected across both platforms. At the time, it was the largest data breach in gaming history. Sony pulled the networks down for 23 days. 23 days. If you were a PlayStation owner, you simply couldn't play. No online games, no updates, no store. Just a black screen and a message saying, maintenance. Some people didn't even know why. They just knew their console was a brick. The silence was deafening. And for millions of people, the question wasn't, when will it come back? It was, is my information safe? Anonymous publicly denied responsibility for the data theft, admitting only to the denial of service attacks. Hotz denied any involvement too, writing on his own blog that he had nothing to do with it and would rather not have the FBI at his door. To this day, no one has been publicly identified as the party responsible. No arrests, no convictions, no one held accountable. Just 100 million people wondering if their information was floating around somewhere on the internet, waiting to be used. What isn't in dispute is the sequence of events. Sony went after Hotz. Anonymous escalated on his behalf. And weeks later, the largest data breach in gaming history happened. Correlation isn't proof, but it's hard to look at that timeline and call it a coincidence. The fallout reached all the way to Washington. Sony was hauled before a U.S. House subcommittee to explain why it took nearly a week to tell customers their data might be compromised. A week. Your credit card information could be in someone's hands, and nobody told you. Sony's CEO publicly apologized and offered credit monitoring to affected users. The breach was estimated to cost the company at least $171 million, and that figure didn't even include the lawsuits still coming. But numbers that big stopped meaning anything. What mattered were the people, the real account holders, the ones who got the email a week late, the ones who had to cancel cards and change passwords and wonder if someone across the world was using their identity. They didn't start a fight with Sony. They didn't hack anything. They didn't call for a boycott or join Anonymous. They just wanted to play games. And they became the biggest victims of a war they had nothing to do with.
That's not supposed to happen.
George Hotz never went to prison. He settled with Sony and moved on to stints at Google and Facebook before founding Comma.ai, a self-driving car company. He's still in tech today, still taking apart problems other people call unsolvable. The kid with the soldering iron became a founder. The story had a happy ending, for him. Sony paid for the breach far longer than the news cycle lasted, in lawsuits, in settlements, in a dent to user trust that took years to repair. But the real lesson was never about hacking. It was about what happens when a company responds to a curious teenager with a legal team instead of a conversation. How fast one decision spirals. How a legal dispute becomes a crisis affecting more than 100 million strangers who had nothing to do with any of it. This isn't a clean story with an obvious villain. It's a kid who wanted to understand how something worked, a corporation that answered with lawyers, and a chaotic online movement that turned it into something none of them could control. The next time a company tells you their system is unhackable, what they usually mean is no one's found the crack yet. And the next time a company takes away something you paid for, remember what happened the last time they tried. Subscribe. The next one ends somewhere even darker.